Is Amanda, and today our naturalists are answering your questions about flight. But first, a couple of things to go over. Today's program is all about flight. Have you ever watched an animal take flight and wonder, how is that even possible? If at any time you have a question, just pop it into the comments and one of these three brilliant naturalists will answer it for you. This program will be recorded and available for rewatching or sharing on our YouTube channel, and expects this to last about 30 to 45 minutes. Each person up here has picked their favorite thing about flight to share with you. They'll answer some questions that have already been submitted to us, and they'll answer all of yours as well. So we'll have a new Nature Chatters every Friday this semester beginning at 10 a.m. You can find the live stream on YouTube, which is where we ask that you comment your questions during the live events. A complete schedule of topics can be found at the link that will be posted in the comment section. And we encourage you to submit your questions before the live event, before the next live event, so our staff can answer you and give you a shout out, and they can give you the best possible answer. So our next Nature Chatter is on October 16th, and we'll be covering breathing. So more details on that will be given at the end of today's program. So right now it's time to meet our naturalists. Rachel, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey, my name is Rachel, and I like birds.
Hey, I am Emily, and I am one of the naturalists here. And, I like things that usually don't fly, but things that fly are pretty cool too.
Good morning, I'm Deb, and I've always wanted to fly. I love flying in airplanes, but I want to fly.
That's great. So thank you. Now, can each of you share us a little bit of share something that you're curious about? Share something that interests you about flight.
I can go first. So I know that the obvious thing for me to share is about birds. But I think insects are really interesting to me. And as I learn more about how they fly, like I just have a lot of questions about it. Like, have you noticed that when beetles fly or ladybugs fly, they're really clumsy about it? And it turns out that's because insects fly in a completely different way from us. So I just want to show a couple of cool videos that demonstrate exactly what's happening with insects. So here's like the first video, and it's because their muscles work a totally different way. So inside a bug's exoskeleton, you can see on the screen that there's a football there, and the muscles inside a bug are attached to the exoskeleton, and they kind of squish everything in and out like that football down there, just because the muscles are squishing the exoskeleton. But dragonflies, which are much, much better at flying, they have muscles attached to every single wing inside their exoskeleton. So that's why dragonflies are so much better at flying than other insects. They have a lot of control. And I love this video of a close-up in slow motion of a dragonfly's wings, because you can really see those muscles like working on those little wings there. That's by Smarter Every Day, which is such a fun channel on YouTube. And I do have one more video of just a dragonfly in flight, so you can kind of see just how much control they have over every single little wing. So you can see they control every single wing separately, which is why they're very fearsome predators of mosquitoes and other insects. And it really sets them apart from other bugs like flies and beetles and bees and every other insect that just kind of flutters their wings in a really nondescript way and bumbles around. So yeah, that's how insects fly.
Awesome. Emily, what interests you about flight?
Okay, I'm super excited to share about this because this is some stuff that I just learned and I didn't really know about, but I was just thinking normally we think about birds and insects flying around, but you know what's really weird that it can fly? A bat. it's really, really weird to think that a bat can actually fly, because they are the only mammals that can actually truly fly. So it's kind of insane. So let's look at this video really quickly of a bat flying and just see what that looks like. Oop. I don't think this is mine. So a bat flying is pretty different looking than some of the insects and birds that are out there, because just kind of the way that their bodies are put together around their wings is very, very different too. So we'll see if we can get that pulled up or not. Maybe. Okay, if not, we'll just kind of talk about why it's weird. So it's really weird that these guys can fly because, I mean, one, they didn't adapt and evolve it. Oh, is it working? Yay! So there's a bat flying. It's just kind of strange looking to see how just maneuverable they are, how well they're able to move around. So they are really, really good flyers, but why? Like, why are they flyers when other mammals are not? And so to figure it out, they actually started looking at fossils, of course, because that's where you find a lot of answers. So we'll pull up that bat fossil picture really quick. So this bat fossil on the left, and I'm going to butcher the name, Onchonycteris. That's not right, but it's close enough. You get the idea. That's like 52 million years old bat right there. But if you look at that skeleton compared to the one next to it, which is just like a modern day bat, they pretty much look the same. But this is like the oldest intact bat fossil that we actually have. So we don't really know what they looked like before that or how they got powered flight like birds and insects when they already looked like this like 50 million years ago. So they do have some like general ideas of how this came about, and we actually have some other mammals today that are able to do this. So we'll go to this next video and it'll show you kind of what they think bats were able to do before they started flying. So this is the flying squirrel. So we have these in America, and you can see he's gliding. So gliding is not flying. They are totally different things, but he has his arms and legs spread out, and those are those big flaps of skin in between them. And basically what we see on a bat wing is actually a huge thing of skin in between all of his fingers. So it's pretty similar. There's bones all throughout that too. So they think that beforehand, bats were actually living in trees, they were eating insects, and to help them catch insects better, they were gliding around, and eventually that gliding turned into flying, into powered flight, which we don't exactly have complete proof of that because they just don't have very many good fossils beforehand, but that's kind of what they're thinking is the idea. So we'll go to the next picture, and this will show some just other modern day gliders. So we had the flying squirrel, then on top we have the little sugar glider, which some people keep as pets. And then this one's really weird. I'd never heard of this. It's called a colugo. And so this is a little glider that's in Southeast Asia where you can really see just those big flaps of skin underneath there that help them fly. And then of course our modern day bat. So you can kind of tell that that might have been what he started out as before he started flying. But again, we don't really know for sure. But I thought that was pretty cool about how bats flew.
Okay, I'm learning so much already. Like, I knew that dragonflies were pretty fierce predators. They catch 3 out of every 4 attempts of what they go after, which is a really good rate for a predator. And what I just learned about bats was all new too. So Deb, what you got?
Hard acts to follow, isn't it? Yeah. But here earlier, I was flapping at an insect that was flying around. We tend to have a lot of flying insects here in the Nature Center. So I want to know, why can't we as humans fly? And part of the issue is that these animals that you've been talking about have all of these wonderful structures. And, you know, we see people flying in the movies like Superman, but I want to be able to fly. So what is it that we need? And we might show the next slide. There are 4 forces of flight that physically allow these animals to fly. And we'll give it just a second to see those 4 forces. Here we go. So the 4 forces of flight are lift, and that's what allows that animal or the insect or the bat that is able to fly to raise themselves up off the ground or off of a tree branch. They have propulsion, or sometimes called thrust in the human world, is got to be produced so that they can continue their forward motion. But at the same time, they've got a problem. Other forces are working against them. Gravity is pulling them down, depending upon the mass or weight that they have. And drag is working against them, trying to move forward. You know, like some days on a windy day, you might see a bird just kind of soaring or hanging still, and you just wonder how they can do it. It's because they've got so much drag working against their forward motion or their propulsion. So what did humans decide to do to overcome these forces, and how could they develop them for themselves? The next short video segment is an early attempt by people to figure out how to fly. So you see that they knew they needed some kind of structure, like a bird's wings, that they needed some kind of forward motion, that thrust or propulsion. And here our individual has a terrible accident going down the hill trying to create those forces of flight that other animals seem to have so naturally. Our next video segment, we'll wait, there we go. This person's trying to create thrust or that forward motion with roller skates, trying to get themselves to go fast enough. You notice that they've attached these wing-like structures to their arms to make sure that they can fly, and not very successful, never got off the ground. Here's a third attempt. We have kind of a bicycle type structure. We've got wheels. The person is creating thrust by moving their legs as quickly as they can. We've got the bird wings flapping on the sides, trying to create the lift. And eventually they crash and burn and are not able to get off the ground. And here's a fourth attempt that looks a little more like the airplanes that we know of today. We've still got those big wing structures that they're trying to move. We have a propeller on the front that's going to create the thrust or the forward motion, the propulsion, but they've got too much mass or too much weight. So a whole field of engineering took place, aeronautics, in order to help us discover how to fly. And wouldn't it be wonderful, though, if we could just take off? That's what I would love to do. So that's what I have about humans attempting to fly.
Well, I have to agree with you, Deb. So now I'm not so disappointed that as a kid, I tried to fly by jumping off a small hill with my umbrella, and it did not work. But I didn't get hurt either.
And Alan, we'll get back to those later in case if we want to visit more about feathers. But
yep. So now we've got some questions for you. I think this one is going to be for Rachel. If bird bones are hollow, do they break easily?
Okay, that's a great question. And I know birds kind of have a reputation for being a little bit fragile, but that's not because their bones are fragile. Their bones are actually really, really strong. And I pulled this goose bone out of our cabinet here that we did kind of hollow out. So you can see it is hollow on the inside. It doesn't have solid marrow like you would expect in a mammal bone. But also what you might be able to see is that there's all these little crisscrosses and lattice works inside of there that kind of strengthen it. So if you picture a suspension bridge or something with all those crisscrosses going down it, those kinds of structures make something that's kind of thin or hollow or not solid pretty strong. And their bones are also fairly dense. So I know that with some birds, their skeletons are actually a lot heavier than you would expect, given the fact that they're hollow, because the density is also something that makes them really strong. And let me see if I can give you another view inside this bone, so you can see those hollows and crisscrosses inside of there. Yeah. Also, fun fact, the reason they're hollow is because their lungs are inside of their bones. And so that kind of also adds a different layer of structure, sort of an organ musculature structure to those bones. Yeah, hope that answered the question.
What? Their lungs? Keep on learning. All right. So if they're hollow and that keeps them lighter, how high can birds fly? Emily, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that. So it's definitely something that depends on the bird, because obviously probably not going to see a sparrow like too high in the sky necessarily, because their bodies need to be adapted to take that really high altitude. They need to be able to handle less oxygen, thinner oxygen up way up high. So generally they can be about like 10,000 to 13,000 feet. Like that's kind of a normal range for a lot of birds. But the highest flyer is actually I think it's pronounced Ruppel's griffin vulture. And they found him like soaring around at 37,000 feet. 37,000 feet. And the reason they know that is because he got sucked into an airplane turbine all the way up there. So that's how they know that he was able to fly that high, which is kind of crazy. Luckily, the plane was able to land safely, just so you know, but the vulture did not make that. Other than that, there's like, I think it's called the common crane. They can fly around like 33,000 feet. So there are some that are able to fly at like plane level, which is pretty impressive, but their bodies have to be able to handle the harsh conditions up there.
Common cranes are really common in Europe, and I think we've had a couple of them pop up in the US too, just so you know.
All right. So how does like the structure of wing feathers support flight? Deb?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting that feathers are so complex. I mean, when you just look at them on a bird, you think, oh, those are nice and soft. And how is it that they use those different structures on their feathers to help them fly? Well, they actually have, and if Alan could pull up that slide that I had with regards to the different kinds of feathers, they have wing feathers that are similar to this one that are on the outside of their body. And they have this structure down the middle that is really strong. And Rachel talked earlier about bones not being able to break, but even this structure, and I won't bend it too much because we use these for programming, is really difficult to bend. And so it has a lot of strength, even though it has that hollow structure that gives them a little less mass. Then they also have tail feathers that are a little more rounded at the tip, that you would see kind of sometimes helping the bird to balance, but they might also be used for camouflage. Then you come to the kinds of feathers that look a little bit like a feather at the top, but at the bottom they have this fuzzy stuff, and that's what's kind of helping keep the bird warm. So all kinds of different structures of feathers, but the ones that are most important to flight are kind of those wing feathers, and I'll get over here to the camera. Here is a wing of an owl, and you can see right here along this front part of the wing that it's kind of rounded. And that's what those early people trying to develop flight finally had to figure out, is that in order to get lift or get those structures off the ground, you had to have something that's called an airfoil. And you can produce that pretty easily with just a simple piece of paper. If you fold it over the top and you blow over the top of it, and the air is moving faster over the top, then you're creating the lift. And that's what they had to figure out. In order to create lift, you had to have that airfoil or that curved structure. Now, of course, you still had to have the thrust or that forward motion to help them to move too. So the different feather structures are helpful to the bird.
Wow, thank you, Deb. So we've got a question from Cassie. Cassie wants to know, I saw a video about flying snakes. What about flying snakes? Rachel, would you care to help us out with this?
I can do my best. We were having a conversation in the chat and we were like, who? Does anybody know about this? And I think a couple of us have seen the video that you're talking about, which was basically snakes like jumping from tree to tree. And I think in the video, what they do is they kind of flatten out their bellies using like their ribs, kind of the same way, I guess, that cobras can flatten out their neck and create that hood. And they're not flying. I hate to break it to you. They're just gliding, which, you know, there's a lot of animals out there that really cannot fly, but we call them flying something or other just because it kind of reminds us of that. But there's a really big difference between like powered flight, being able to get off the ground and generate that lift that Deb keeps talking about, versus just like falling slowly, which is what the snakes do. Yeah.
Thanks, Rachel. I like that, falling slowly. Maybe if we can't fly, maybe I can find a way to at least fall slowly and not get hurt.
I think you can buy suits for that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's called parachutes.
Cool. All right. So how are huge, heavy animals like pteranodons able to fly? And talking about pteranodons, that sounds like something Rachel would be able to answer best.
Yes, I will jump back on. Thank you for asking about pteranodons because number one, they're an amazing Kansas fossil. Number two, they're like the only example of a reptile that actually can fly. So like how serendipitous is it that it came after the snake question? So they're the only powered flighted reptile, but even pteranodons actually had hollow bones. And if you think about like their wingspan, so even though their wings are like 25 feet long sometimes or something ridiculous like that, their wings are mostly their pinky finger. So if you can imagine, like my thumbs here are at the top of the pteranodon wing. The pinky finger is the part that goes all the way out, and then the membrane stretches from their really long pinky finger up to their body. So most of their wingspan is just a membrane that's covered in really light, like hair-like feathers and just skin. And a lot of their body was built to be hollow and lightweight, just like a bird. And they also had some of their lungs inside their bones too. So even though they're huge animals, in order to get off the ground, being a little bit lightweight can help. Also, just, you know, the heaviest birds, like, okay, like that was all pteranodons, but birds are also really lightweight. So, you know, if you ever see somebody do a program with like a red-tailed hawk or one of those big hawks sitting on a glove, they probably weigh about 2 to 3 pounds, which is absolutely nothing. A hummingbird weighs 2 paper clips. So even the heaviest birds that fly are like 30 to 40 pounds. They're not that heavy.
Cool. Well, thanks, Rachel. So I think we're covering a lot about a lot of different animals flying, or what we think is flying or looks like flying. So what about fish? And we're going to go to our resident fish nerd for that.
Yeah, that would, yeah, fish. Good old fish. Yeah, so I am discovering there are a lot of like posers in the animal world that like just pretend to fly, I guess, because we've kind of talked about a lot of those guys. And flying fish is another one. So there is like a group of marine fish called flying fish. And again, that's basically gliding. So what they do, a lot of fish have just really, really powerful swimming muscles. And so if there's like a predator or something chasing them, they're going to try to swim away. But what these guys have figured out to do is swim using those muscles out of the water. And then that gives them so much, I guess it would be lift. I don't know if it's thrust or lift or a little bit of both, probably thrust. They thrust out of the water. And then they have some really well adapted fins that they're able to use for gliding. So they are actually swimming up out of the water and then just using their fins to be able to glide just a little bit, just to escape some predators. So again, just not actually flying, not that powered flight, because that is pretty rare in other like animal groups. Yeah, but they are really cool fish. They're pretty neat looking.
Yeah, I've seen videos of those. They're pretty cool. So what about like feathers? So when I've gone out walking, and I find sometimes like fluffy feathers that are blowing around and some really stiff feathers. Deb, what can you tell us about different kinds of feathers?
Well, I think I mentioned a little bit earlier that probably you're going to have there they are. You're going to have your flight feathers, which are kind of on the outside. So if I get back to the wing of the owl here are flight feathers along the wing of the animal. If I turn it over to the other side, you can see that there's some kind of softer feathers in here. And those would be those plume type feathers that have some warmth in them to help protect the animal. But again, you're going to find most of those plume feathers closer to the body for the warmth. And well, just the other day, I was out on the golf course and I actually found a little bit of each kind of a goose's feather. So I found one that has the thick rachis in the middle. That is more of a flight type feather. I found one of the plume type feathers, which has a feather, more of the feather structure on top, and then the kind of soft stuff at the bottom that is more of the keeping the animal warm. But as I was talking, I just remembered something else that I needed to tell you about flight feathers in particular. Flight feathers have something really special to them that helps them keep the animal in flight. They have these little barbels or kind of Velcro-like structures on the feathers. So if an animal, let's say accidentally rubs against something and its pieces of its flight feathers get pulled apart like that, they can take their beak and do a little bit of preening and get those Velcro structures or those barbels to stick back together so that they can make sure that the next time that they take off from a branch or from the ground, that their flight feathers are in good shape for flying.
Wow, thanks, Deb.
All
So
right.
that's all feathers for birds, but what about bat wings and bird wings? How are those different? Emily?
Ooh, my bats. I actually think I might have a picture that'll help answer this question, Alan. If you could find that for me, because they just the inside of them, even just from looking at the video earlier, you can kind of tell what they look like, at least on the inside of a bat wing, because you can actually kind of see through the bat wing. Again, that skin on there. So just from looking at them, we know that their wings are different because, well, birds have feathers all over them. And as Deb has said, those feathers are really, really helpful for how they fly. So these guys, we have our humans, so you can see our little hand skeleton in there, and the different colors are kind of show you the bones that are in each of those. So pretty much all the same kind of bones, except if you notice on the bird, a lot of them are actually fused together, or it may seem like they have a little bit less fingers and stuff like we do. But the bat is basically just like an elongated, spread out version of ours, since we're both mammals. And so if you look at that, the bat has basically his entire hand in his whole wing. So his wing is basically just all of his fingers inside of it, all of his little finger bones inside of there, which if you look at the birds, that's not the case. Their bones, their arm basically is just on that little bit of a top part. So that's why these bats are actually really, really good at maneuvering, because they have these bones and muscles on those bones that are helping them control every little tiny movement whenever they're flying around. So that's how they're able to like turn on a dime, or they're able to fly and just fly straight upside down and hang. They're able to do that just because of all of that bone structure and that basically hand inside of their wing, unlike these bird wings that you can see. So it's pretty cool to see how different they actually are on the inside.
All right, thanks, Emily. That picture is really, really helpful. I kind of pictured the bat wing before, but the bird one, it's completely new to me. I hadn't seen that before. All right, so now we're going back to birds. Why can some birds not fly? Are they too big? Are they too heavy? And like, what advantages do they have from not flying if that's helping them? Rachel, can you help us with that?
Yeah, that sounds like a question for me. So I think the first thing we need to understand is that birds actually, the base trait of birds is that they could fly. Like that's why they survived the period of time when there were other dinosaurs around that could glide and fly and had feathers and were ground based. So the first birds could already fly. And then looking outside of that, a lot of the birds that don't fly today are birds that lived on islands that didn't have any predators. And so they just lost the ability to fly over time because it was no longer advantageous. Penguins, which kind of fly in the water, but actually they evolved over time really dense bones, which helped them to regulate their ability to dive underwater. So their adaptations took a different direction and caused them to be quite heavy. And then the other ones that we typically think of are things like ostriches, which are just running birds. And so again, they lost the ability to fly over time because their evolutionary path just took them into a direction of prioritizing running over flying. And as a result, they also lost some of those features. But note that some birds that can't fly still have hollow bones and those other adaptations like their lungs inside their bones. So not all of them have denser bones, but the ones that can't fly, that's unusual. That's something that came about as a loss.
All right, thanks, Rachel. Here's a question from Eli. Eli wants to know, he says, airplanes are really heavy. So why can they fly if they're not lightweight with all of our luggage and people on them? And I'm all right, Deb. I was going to send that to you. Thank you.
Well, Eli, that's a really good question because I have at times thought when I'm inside the cabin of an airplane rushing down the runway ready to take off, how it was possible that that aircraft was going to get up off the ground. And it has to do with that thrust. You know, birds are creating thrust through their muscular structure and those wings as they're flapping them. And the hummingbird, and Rachel maybe have to remind me, can flap its wings so many times a second. I can't remember how many it is exactly. But the airplane had to create enough thrust to get all that mass off the ground and overtake gravity and create lift. And so they came up with these huge engines, and these engines are providing that thrust, So as the airplane rushes down the runway, the air starts to move faster over the top of the wing, as I did with the little piece of paper earlier, and air is moving underneath the wing as well, and it's moving slower. And because it's moving faster over the top of the wing with the aid of those engines, it creates lift and the airplane gets up into the air. Isn't it amazing? Even with all that mass and that weight.
Okay, Deb. So this kind of leads into another question from Nicole. She wants to know, how big would our wings need to be to hold our weight? And if you want to shoot that to Rachel, or you take it yourself.
Well, when I saw that question appear earlier, I thought, holy cow, I don't know how big they would have to be. I just don't think we have the muscular structure that would ever allow us, no matter how big the wings were, how it would allow us to fly. But Rachel can add it into that.
No, I was just going to say, but like, imagine if we did have the musculature, like what would our wings have to look like to get the lift? I don't know the answer to this question. Maybe, I mean, there's some birds that have really short wings and they just flap really hard.
But I think they still have that rounded airfoil structure of the wing that creates the lift. But yeah, they do have to flap awfully hard to create the thrust too. You've got to be able to create both of those forces at the same time in order to be able to get off the ground or off a tree limb or whatever.
So just from comparing a few different resources, they're thinking the average adult male would need a wingspan of at least 6.7 meters, so about 22 feet, to be able to fly. But that calculation does not account for them actually being too heavy to function. So they'd have to be absolutely enormous.
So I just need you all to know that I'm picturing like a pteranodon like human, just like with bat wings out here 20 feet long.
Oh my God.
Oh,
made me
no.
think of one of those early videos of people trying to get a craft off the ground, and it was the one with the propeller and those huge wings on the side of it. And they were trying to flap them, and the flapping was just as slow as it could possibly be. There was no way that amount of mass was going to get off the ground. So I just don't know how humans are going to do it.
Well, we're all assuming that it would be similar to the bat, but if I have wings, I want to have a dragonfly's wings. And so that's how it's going to work for me.
20-foot long dragonfly
Yes.
wings.
Yes.
And then you're like zooping around catching mosquitoes with your arms.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Got 4 of them too.
Yeah.
4 of them. Yeah. 4 20-foot long wings. That'd be amazing.
So you're going to have to really work on those muscles in your back then, because isn't that where the muscles of the dragonfly were? We're all going to have to go work out more.
I'll do my yoga, do some butterflies. Yes. All right. Nicole has another question. She also wants to know, do bats and birds fly differently? Emily, can you help us out with this one?
Yes, they very much do. I was watching a video about it yesterday. There's a really cool YouTube video about how bats fly, if you want to look it up, because there's like this biologist who studies bats and this engineer who did like this really cool study where they put bats in like a flight tunnel where they have like the air rushing against the bat and the bat's trying to fly against it and they're tracking its wings and stuff. And basically, yeah, it's really different because, again, if we remember that picture of the bones and all those bones that are inside of the bat wing versus the bird wing, the bird just has those bones up top and then all of the feathers coming off of it. And sometimes those feathers can be pretty stiff. And so its wing just isn't necessarily as flexible. There's only certain ways that it can move around. Whereas that bat, since it has all of those bones inside of it and then those muscles on that bones, they can literally like basically fold their wing in half. And so that gives them just a lot of control in actually how they fly. And even they'll use their wings to catch prey mid-air and stuff, and just are able to like move around really, really well with those wings. So yeah, they fly very differently just based on how they're made up. But yeah, check out that YouTube video if you're interested. Just look up how bats fly. It's really, really cool.
Emily brought up one thing about wind tunnels. If you'd like an opportunity to see a wind tunnel in action, they have one on the Wichita State University campus where they do a lot of testing of materials and all kinds of things that are going to be used in the airplane manufacturing. So a really neat place to visit. I think you'd have to make an appointment, but the Wichita State University campus has a wind tunnel.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Who knew there were so many things involving flight? And I bet a lot of people thought this might have been all about birds. Well, it wasn't. We had a lot of cool things to learn about. So just a quick heads up to all the students and teachers out there watching. Our next Nature Chatters is October 16th, and we'll be learning all about breathing. So if you know other teachers or homeschoolers who might be interested in attending future programs like this one, a full schedule can be found on our website along with the form to pre-submit questions. So all of the Nature Chatters programs are recorded and available for later viewing on our YouTube channel. So if you're an adult out there who knows someone who might enjoy learning about flight, feel free to share this with them. And I want to tell Alan, thank you for running our tech today. And thanks to Rachel, Emily, and Deb, who answered all of your questions. I'm Amanda, your host for today, and I hope you enjoyed our program. Now get out there and tell someone a new fact about flight you learned today. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.